Hi guys, Amanda Robbins here to talk to you about Jimmy Corrigan, the smartest kid on earth. Before I begin, I would like to talk a little bit about the basic plot summary so that maybe some of us can get some clarification. It was kind of difficult. Some of you might have had some issues. So the story is about two men named Jimmy Corrigan. One is present-day Jimmy Corrigan, who is 36 years old and meets his father for the first time on Thanksgiving. He's very much an introvert. He has issues communicating with people, and he has a very, very unhealthy relationship with his mother. For the most part, his meeting with his father is very uneventful, even though it is the most important event of the novel. And he does meet his adopted sister, which is significant. The second Jimmy Corrigan, or Corrigan, is present day's Jimmy Corrigan's grandfather, so I'm going to call him past Jimmy Corrigan. And he has an absent mother and a very, very abusive father who eventually abandons him at the World's Fair in Chicago. Alright, so this novel is narrated primarily through stream of consciousness, just which means that the events, the plot is typically expressed through character thoughts. There are a lot of fantasies, a lot of dream sequences, and a lot of shifts in time that aren't exactly signaled clearly, which can make the process of reading it quite jarring. It really reminds me a lot of William Faulkner's The Sound and the Fury. Now, I'm doing some research on stream of consciousness in another class, so I read this book, Stream of Consciousness in the Modern Novel by Robert Humphrey. It's amazing, so you should read it. Anyway, he outlines some basic characteristics of stream of consciousness. One is a level of incoherence. Another is a level of disunity between ideas. The third is important. It's the fluid movement of the prose, like a stream. And then, of course, the most basic is the expression of character thoughts. Now, the expression of character thoughts is told through the panels, of course, but also I think these little bits of cursive text are very much Jimmy Corrigan's thoughts, and see how they're split up in strange ways with like lots of breaks, which adds to some incoherence. But I think primarily the disunity of ideas and the level of incoherence is expressed through the panels. Now, this one I'm showing you right now is not the most confusing one I've read, but there are others that are just very difficult to read. And this is primarily because often the reader doesn't know where they're supposed to go next, where their eye is supposed to go next. Often you don't know if you're supposed to read down or to the side, left to right, right to left, which can make the process very difficult to read. I read a little bit of criticism about this novel, and one scholar says that the panels can be read often in any order that the reader likes, which can add to a certain level of variety in reader response. So I guess my first question for you, sorry, I had to stop because my cat. Anyway, my first question for you is, did Ware use this technique well? What are the drawbacks of stream of consciousness? What are some of the benefits? And another interesting thing about stream of consciousness that I will just add for funsies is that when it's done well, there's very little authorial interjection, which means that the author will not explain things. They'll be very distant. There will be some like signals of authorial interjection, however, some very subtle ones. And I think those are the little red arrows that pop up that actually tell you where to go next. These are not used in every page, though. And then, of course, these wonderful little bits of transition, like the but. There's some therefores and so's, and I find those very, very interesting. Anyway, I find them interesting mostly because they kind of give us these subtle reminders that there is an objective narrator at play. If you look at this very first page, we start out very far away in the universe, and then we kind of zoom in, which means that our narrator is omniscient, and he is in control of the story, not Jimmy Corrigan. Now, I've also identified some important symbols of the novel, and I want to say that the most important one is, of course, the Superman, which we're introduced right away on the second page of the novel. He's a very dysfunctional Superman, and I don't really want to dwell on him too much, so I'm going to let you guys in the comments below tell me what you think this Superman symbol kind of signifies for Jimmy Corrigan. All right, another important symbol or motif is, of course, red hair, which wear attaches to females that either Jimmy Corrigan, past or present, kinds of desire. So I guess it just represents female sexuality. Speaking of red, which is a huge color, it's a very important color in this novel. I mean, present-day Jimmy Corrigan's mother calls him on a red phone. And there's also this red bird, which I will say I wasn't quite sure what he or she symbolized. Perhaps she symbolizes nothing. Maybe she's just like a little transitional tool to kind of help move the plot along. You guys can tell me what you think this bird symbolizes. There's also the peach, which I didn't really recognize right away as a symbol after reading this until I read this final page in the novel where Ware sort of spells it out. He tells us his definition of peach, then he says see symbol, and then he kind of clarifies it a little bit. So read this page if you haven't already. I think the peach is also connected to sex, which kind of brings me to my next symbol. So my favorite symbol is this miniature horse, which Jimmy Corrigan, past Jimmy Corrigan, creates with some other schoolmates at an Italian schoolmate's home. Now, Jimmy Corrigan has this strange and very interesting rivalry with this Italian boy. This Italian boy has a beautiful, wonderful family, and there's an interesting dynamic between them. But before he sees the final result of his creation at this Italian boy's house, he has a little fantasy about it where he's chasing after his little red-headed object. He presents her with his miniature horse, and she reacts with, "Oh, really? For me? It's beautiful." And then he's able to obtain her, which is nice. But then after it's revealed, we understand that Jimmy Corrigan's horse is actually a disfigured specimen who doesn't even look like a horse. And the other boys make fun of him for this, threatening his masculinity. And this is just a very depressing scene, one of the sadder ones in the novel. Now, after revealing his disfigured horse, he has another sexual fantasy about his little red-headed object, in which he first examines a sick, dying horse in front of him, and then he sees his little red-headed girlie. He chases her, and what results is something very violent and dysfunctional and just disturbing. Now, before I leave you, I wanted to talk a little bit about this juxtaposition with sex and violence. Now, past Jimmy Corrigan's sexual relationship is represented by his horse because it is disfigured and it results in violence and sex results in violence. And this is because past Jimmy Corrigan's father did not equip him with the proper tools for being a man and for engaging in sexual behaviors. Unlike the little Italian boy who has a very beautiful horse and a beautiful father and eventually does obtain the red-headed girl. Now, present-day Jimmy Corrigan also has this connection with sex and violence. If you'll notice in some panels, he'll have a sexual fantasy about a woman shortly after something violent has occurred. For instance, there's this scene where he gets a bloody nose, and then in the next panel, he's observing a nurse's lips and having a little moment. And here in this panel, which is a wonderful little section, he has a sexual fantasy about his adopted sister, and in it, a nuclear bomb erupts, which is terribly violent, and then they sort of have a sexual relationship and eventually have this harmonious home. So I wanted to ask you guys, this is my final question to you, why is sex and violence so intertwined in this novel? What is the significance of that? All right, that's all I have for you guys today. Thanks. Bye.